Are you a new product leader that is trying to implement OKRs or shift from output measurement to outcome-based measurement? The reality is that most of the product leaders that I coach are at companies that are still early in the adoption of these philosophies. And that's why in this episode of Fearless Product Leadership, I'm asking my experienced product leaders, how do you set product team goals? These are the product leaders that we're going to be speaking with today. You can get more information on their background by watching their bio videos using the links below. Setting goals for my product teams was one of the most important yet arduous responsibilities that I had as a product leader. It was so critical to get clear, meaningful, measurable goals that resonated with company leadership, but also were grounded in what mattered to customers, because that's what really inspired the product and engineering teams. In this episode of Fearless Product Leadership, we're going to hear from experienced product leaders who are at both startup, mid-size, and enterprise stage companies talk about how they set goals for the product team. And in it, you're going to get practical tips on how they set the goals, how frequently they set the goals, how they tie those goals to company strategy, and who is involved in the goal setting process.
Setting goals as part of the product team is one of the most important things that I think we do as leaders. And I think it's something that has always been a part of how, at least I operate, and I think many people operate, but exactly how you do it, there's so many different ways to do it. And I think it's something that I really continue to try new approaches and see how we can get better over time. And so in terms of setting goals, it's something actually that's top of mind for me right now. And one that when I go back to, I guess it was maybe 6 months ago, I was reading John Doerr's book on Measure What Matters. And what it really was resonating with me in terms of how to solve some of the problems that I think our teams face, that a lot of times they might be setting some goal of themselves. So bottom up, the product team has some objective, but then trying to reconcile that with other top-down management goals that might come from your CEO or other leaders, and then trying to reconcile that with other teams that you're working with. So you've got dependencies, you've got stakeholders, and so nobody was really solving those types of problems. And so I think what I was excited about is I think the promise of how to use OKRs in terms of trying to set an objective, and that objective being something that is inspirational and something that you ideally could align either up or sideways in the organization, but then being very crisp about your key result and saying, this is how we're going to measure it, is I thought really a great way of breaking it down. And in particular, I think part of where you get hung up in setting goals is by focusing too much on output over outcomes. And I think, if we had a question on roadmaps, we could start talking about roadmaps and how you get hung up too often as product leaders on features and output. And I think what this forces us to do is really think about, what are you trying to drive? And so I think that question can be asked at a variety of levels, but it can start with the product team. And I think it should start with the product team in terms of, look, what are you trying to change? So, in our teams, often to building consumer products, you're trying to drive engagement. So maybe one of my teams is trying to take some number of customers that do that really use our product on a monthly basis, and they want to move that up over time. And so that's really what you're trying to drive. And then you can start to really think about, well, what are the ways that might change that trajectory of that outcome? And so then you can use that as a measure of, well, maybe we could add feature A, or we could improve feature B. But you're doing it through the lens of what outcome you're trying to drive, which I think helps in terms of focusing that list as to what are you working on? Because if it's not driving an outcome, then shoot, why are you doing it? But also it helps you evaluate the success of those things. So as you build and launch those, you can then look back and say, are you actually achieving it? And so having those conversations with teams to understand, what did you say you were going to do? How did you move it? Is, I think, that's all the healthy parts of that life cycle. So you've got setting, you've got acting, then you're evaluating on the back end, which should then move into the next cycle. And so I think that's what's great about OKRs is ideally you're doing that on a quarterly basis, and then you're working throughout the company. And so it's something that we're now rolling out more broadly in our organization. I'm pretty excited about what it's going to allow us to do because it puts everybody at the table. It's various stakeholders in different functions. It puts your engineering team at the table because they've got to come to terms with, is that feasible in this quarter? And then it really keeps that accountability around, did you achieve what you said you were going to achieve?
It's actually tied to the strategic intent document I spoke about. So let me start off with what we used to do. We used to actually have the product managers build out what we call bizarre voice goals, BVG, almost like Jira tickets, but they would start with the bigger mission, what they want to get done, and then build out tickets from that point of view, that point out, and the metrics also. But one thing was fundamentally missing, and that was almost the why, the narrative as to why this is the right goal. So as I mentioned, the product leadership team kind of built out a strategic intent document with our executive team for, I'd say, a span of 2-3 years. Now we have the product managers build out their own intent documents, the product intent or feature intent document. And it actually is modeled after, I think it's called the project poster within Jira. It's within Confluence. And it just asks the questions of what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do it, right? And asking those questions, like we talk about the problem space, then we talk about the customer, then validation. Here's where you actually begin to tease out your risky assumptions. And then I have a section called building, the ready to make it, which is where you start ideating on how you solve the problem, and you bring in engineers for this fourth section. But the creation and the writing and being really intentional and really building out the narrative of the why allows the product manager to collaborate with their peers on what they want to do and for whom, given perhaps a window of 6 to 9 months, and what they think the work products and deliverables need to do that will drive the original objective. And when they build that out, it's then easy to write the BVG. It also is easy to create PowerPoint slides that express what your product or feature is supposed to be doing in the next 3, 6, 9 months, and you really bring your team along. Oftentimes, in that process, they tease out what metrics they intend to move. Some of them will be lagging, others may actually be leading, and there are questions in there about, are these measurable? What are the current benchmarks? And that's actually how the goals are set, right? And then we can measure them afterwards. We've used OGSM, OKRs, but regardless of what framework, the why, bringing your team along on the why and determining how you're going to measure how the deliverables address the why is what the foundation of this planning document is. So that's kind of how we set our goals.
How do we set goals for the team here at Homebase? Again, it does go back to us interrogating the ideas and thinking about how big and how long until we learn something significant about this. We know exactly how much revenue and how much customer growth we want to accomplish over the next quarter and 3 quarters trailing, frankly, after that. And so, all of the PMs have that overarching goal in mind. Now, not all of them are going to be taking a proportional share of that growth under their wing. So making sure that their contribution to it is significant enough is where we're sitting. I'm not in a position to say to Rachel on my team, your job this month is to deliver 25,000 conversions into this paid plan. I saying to her, your job this month is to find 3 ways that we can influence conversion behavior. And then let's put them out there and see which one is the most influential. Then let's attach a metric to it. Now, I know what the percent activity and the percent meaningful conversion is going to be, and Rachel does too, but it's not pinned on one activity, right? And it's pinned on the things that we've discovered are going to be meaningful. So she's not looking for that, conversion growth in the dark. We're saying, what are some ideas that we can pursue? What's the biggest one? How are we going to figure out how to meaningfully implement this? And then we might have an idea of, if we're seeing this many people in and we can drive this conversion, here's your number. It all does roll up to, like I said, the company targets. But we're a product team of 5 people right now. So it's really easy for us to have a universal notion of what the goals are. And just like we don't have a roadmap that looks out many, many months because we're iterating, we're also iterating on our goals. And there's that explicit understanding. I think that one of the things that we only recently got good at was celebrating when we hit those goals or when we get to a milestone. We hit a milestone yesterday and the number of schedules published in a single day. And that was the result of probably 4 months of work on our scheduling product that cumulatively had this impact. And yesterday was just an incredible day to be able to say, look, we have this number now. And I think that if I had started somebody out saying, get to this number, that's a much more daunting task. I think that when you attach goals to tactics, they become inherently less effective because then you're sort of a hammer and everything looks like a nail, right? And you get stuck in the hammer role and you're constantly searching for nails. And I think that when you set goals against sort of bigger initiatives and bigger ideas, and you set them against possibilities, that you're opening up any good product person's creativity to explore and to learn things from customers and to learn things from data, to learn things from their engineering teams, to learn things from customer support. We have a great customer success team, right? And if we were saying, tell us how to, how many people want this feature? Well, this is the feature and we're just going to pour as much fuel on it as we can. I think it becomes quixotic very quickly and it becomes demoralizing. And I've worked in a lot of organizations that use OKRs. And I'll tell you that very often leaders love OKRs because you think everybody's lined up. And most of the people who have OKRs consider them bullshit. And that to me is the worst thing. And when I start really thinking about why, it's because you get too aligned around a tactic or a particular metric rather than the objective part of OKR, which is a great idea.
So here's what I found that works well, maybe not so well when it comes to accountability and setting goals for product folks. I recently, where I worked most recently, ShopRunner, we set in place a system of OKRs. So that's out there now in the industry. A lot of people use it. I think it started through Google. And it was, we spent about a year working through the process, right? So of course you launch this idea and you're like, oh, great, it's going to work the first time. I think we set company OKRs, which were really, really good. And those OKRs operated at an annual level. And so those were the ones that didn't change. And then what we did was take it one step lower and set team OKRs on a quarterly basis. And each of those OKRs were supposed to build up to the top level OKRs. So we, quarter by quarter, really worked at it. So of course, like the first quarter, you try something, you got to refine it and see how it works. But what we did the first quarter, I'm trying to remember, we took each team and had each team set OKRs. So we had sales do OKRs, marketing do OKRs, et cetera. And what we realized that quarter was it's hard to actually break OKRs apart in that way because sales goals and marketing goals and product goals were so intertwined that it actually, we started to not work in sync. We were trying to work to our individual OKRs and we actually weren't working across the teams as well. And then I know the next quarter we took it down, we had the whole team. So we took all of the director level teams and the heads of kind of the various agile dev teams set together OKRs. And so then we had our top level OKRs at the organization level, and then we had I mean, I would probably have to say like 50 OKRs across the organization at the very detailed level. And that was great because then the OKR was almost the team goal and got very specific on the team goal. And then what we did was group the teams to then review the OKRs together on what I did for my areas. We reviewed them on a bi-weekly basis. And so then just making sure kind of every couple of weeks we're checking in, are we making progress on the things we laid out? And then it was for a quarterly, it's for 3 months worth of time. So that was really great because the teams themselves were very attached to their goals and it was very clear what the expectations were for them. But there was kind of this other missing layer in between it of, okay, well, we've got these top level business goals and then we have this, more day-to-day, week-to-week type goals that the teams were working to. How do we make sure to glue those together? And so that was the next iteration of trying to figure out, okay, maybe too many down here and not enough up here. How do we start to close that gap? So the team's still working through it. It's one of those things that I think that there's always room for improvement. I also think as the company changes, as there's different needs, as teams shift and go, you're going to find things that work for you, ways that work for you. I was also thinking when it comes to goals and accountability, I think that it also depends on what type of team you've got. The product team that I managed at ShopRunner, we were a mix of product feature teams, support teams, and architecture, foundational kind of back-end teams. And for me as a leader, it was very easy to define the product feature team goals, right? It's like, okay, this quarter, we got to get this product out for this client with this type of performance. Very easy, right? Well, I say very easy, but it was easy-ish. It was articulate. You could really encapsulate it. There was start to finish, what are the SMART goals, where there's a time bound and all of those things. When it came to the architecture team, it's one of those things where there's no real endpoint. It's like, well, we need to make the architecture scalable. Well, what does scalable mean? How do you know when you've got there? How do you know when you've been successful with it? So that took a lot more work. And ultimately, I think what we broke it down into is a little bit more like, well, here's a milestone. And it's a little bit more as if, okay, well, we know that there's a handful of milestones that we have to hit. And we know that ultimately these milestones together are going to make progress towards our goal. But it was much less measurable. Like the milestone was a little bit more binary, but the outcome was more difficult to get our arms around. So, again, it's one of those things where it's like, it's like features. You're like, yeah, out to the market, can see it. Architecture, slower moving, more infrastructure, hard to encapsulate. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you do your best, you try, and then you try again, and then you try again, and just stay focused.
I think the way I think about how goals are set for a product team, when I'm trying to think of a good example for that, is there's a couple of different layers to that. One is, and I say this a lot, this relates a little bit to the John Doerr OKR models where you're trying to create connectivity between a team and the organization. But the last thing I want is for a team's goals to feel disconnected from the organization's goals. And that happens a lot where you have the, step 1, this, step 2, question marks, step 3, profit. So for my teams, what I want is for them to be able to make a clear connection between those and look at the goals of the organization, look at the strategy that we've set forward in terms of the major swings that we want to take, and figure out with me what the mandate of those teams are. Like, so at the time that we define that strategy or we redefine that strategy, what is the charter of this team? What piece of this puzzle that we're trying to solve together is this team responsible for? What KPIs does this team believe that they can move that we agree will move the main KPIs? If you are a newsletter team, for example, and what you can measure and impact is opens and click-throughs, how does that relate to our goals around revenue? How does that relate to our goals around building unique visitors? What ancillary or secondary metrics can you connect back to the primary metrics that we feel good about? And what part of those tactics are your mission? So what I tend to do with my teams, like our apps teams or our web teams or our newsletter teams working on growth or engagement or revenue, is what part is you? What are you trying to accomplish? And then when we look at quarterly goals, when we look at their backlogs of both opportunities and stories, keep that in mind. Like, that is your goal. That is what you are trying to accomplish, and connect it to the real metrics, connect it to the work that you've done, and have a little pressure on yourself about, this is the number that I am taking ownership of. I am taking responsibility for this. And the work I'm doing is aimed at this. It's very easy for product teams to get locked up in all the noise, all the signals coming from outside, all of the things people want, the backlog of bugs and the stuff that just kind of piles up. And one of the things I ask of them is especially during quarterly planning, to say, I want to commit to a big effort. I want to commit to something that I think is going to be, and big doesn't necessarily mean it's like a huge piece of work. It's a big impact effort, that something they're going to do that is going to move that needle, that's going to be worth the time that they put into it, that's going to change things. And that way, when they're thinking about their backlogs, when they're thinking about product discovery, when they're thinking about what they want to do, they are focused on that goal. They are focused on the lever they can accomplish, the piece of the puzzle that they're getting after, the clients that they're able to satisfy. So that, and part of that is about it being both top down and bottom up, that we agree on what the metrics are. If I give you a metric and you don't know how to solve it, that's not going to work. You're just going to swirl and try to do crazy things at that point. But if we agree on the metrics, the organization agrees on the metrics, understands, again, back to that transparency about how the work you do connects back up to the larger organizational goals. We coordinate together during quarterly planning, and we say, yes, that is awesome. Let's go after that. That's going to be a change to the way that we do things. Then they know that the stories they work on, the opportunities they pursue, the experiments they conduct are all driven towards achieving that goal. And they know that the work they're doing is impactful, and everyone does, honestly. And it creates that loop of excitement and passion and engagement and transparency.
Setting goals for product teams is foundational for product leaders. And so many companies are great about setting those higher level company goals, maybe for the quarter or for the year, things around revenue or EBITDA, ARR, MRR, or customer growth or retention goals, or even NPS metrics for support teams. But product leaders really need to find those leading indicator proxy metrics that can be owned and are inspiring for the product and engineering teams. And so some types of metrics that you can consider for, say, revenue or new customer growth might be the adoption or usage levels of newly acquired customers. Or even if you're looking at retention, you can find what moment in the customer journey really unlocks the value and has a high correlation to retention, or even unlocking lifetime value goals for those retained customers. So that's really what I try to help product leaders do if they're in the first time setting measurable goals for the product team, is figure out what is possible to measure. How does that relate to those bigger, indisputable corporate objectives? And then, of course, the question becomes, have you actually instrumented the product with the analytics that you need to make the baseline and progress measurement easy for the product teams? And if you haven't done that, then of course you're going to be faced with looking at either making that investment in product analytics instrumentation, or you're going to have to use some other either manual or qualitative calculation in the short term. So this is the type of advice that I provide to product leaders that I coach as part of the coaching work that I do, but also, of course, as part of this Fearless Product Leadership series. If you have a question that we haven't yet tackled and you want to suggest it, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. And of course, if you know of product leaders who would benefit from the advice that I'm sharing in these series, please let them know about the availability of this series on YouTube. And now, of course, it's available in podcast format also. Thanks so much for your support.